One day while riding back to my school, I took a seat in the latest coach of the train as usual. There were no Jim Crow cars back then. When the train started and the conductor came along to collect my ticket, he gave it back to me and said, "I cannot take your ticket there." I thought if he didn't want my ticket, then why bother? I continued on reading. He came back in a little while after he had collected all the tickets and told me, "You cannot stay here. You need to move to the forward car." I refused, saying that the forward car was a smoker and that I was seated in the latest car and I intended to stay there. He tried to drag me out of my seat, and the moment he caught a hold of my arm, I fastened my teeth to the back of his hand. And I held on to the back of the seat with my hands and put my feet against the back of the seat. And he didn't try that again. Not by itself anyway. He went forward and got the baggage man and another gentleman to come help pull me out of my seat. And they succeeded. They were encouraged to do so by the white ladies and gentlemen in that car. Some of them even climbed up on the seat to get a better view and to continue encouraging him in his brave effort. Well, by the time the train had stopped at the first station, when I saw that they were determined to drag me out and put me in that smoker, I told them I'd rather get off the train rather than go in, which is what I did. Strangely enough, I held on to my ticket the entire time. And although the sleeve of my linen duster had been ripped out and I had been pretty roughly handled, I was not physically hurt. When I got back to Memphis, I went and I hired myself a black lawyer. And after months and months went by with no results, I found that he had been bought off by the railroad. So I had to hire a white one. I can see to this day the headlines in the Memphis Appeal: "Darky Damsel Gets Damages." Now, in 1913, at the Chicago Suffrage Parade, I stood in the center of the row as a member of the Chicago Women's Club and president of the Alpha Club, a suffrage organization for colored women. The first hint that there was to be any discrimination against the colored women came when Mrs. Smith was putting the Illinois suffragists through a drill on the second floor of the suffrage parade headquarters. Now, Mrs. Trout, who had been missing from the room for several minutes, she came in hurriedly, held a short conference with Mrs. Smith, and then announced to the waiting women that it was a question whether I would march with their delegation. Oh boy, a murmur of excitement passed around the room, and those standing near me kept an unembarrassed silence. Many of the Eastern and Southern women have greatly resented the fact that there are to be colored women in the delegation. And now this is the words coming from Mrs. Trout. Some have even gone so far as to say they will not march if the Negro women are allowed to take part. The National Suffrage Association and the women in charge of the entire parade has advised us to keep our delegation entirely white. So far as Illinois is concerned, we should like to have Mrs. Wells march in the delegation. But if the National Association has decided that it is unwise to include the colored women, I think we should abide by its decision. Now then she looked around for approval from the audience. Now, you're right, it will prejudice Southern people if we take the colored women into our ranks. Now, this is from a Georgia woman and a sympathizer with the National Association. We're only a small part of the great line of march, and we must not cause any confusion by disobeying orders. That was her statement. The Southern women have tried to evade this question time and time again by giving some excuse or the other every time it's brought up. This was my response to what she said. If the Illinois women did not take a stand in this great Democratic parade, then the colored women are lost. Another woman spoke up. I think that we should allow Mrs. Wells to walk in our delegation. If the women of other states lack moral courage, we should show them that we're not afraid of public opinion. We should stand by our principles. If we do not, the parade will be a farce. However, the matter had been settled. I'm afraid that we shall not be able to have you march with us. This came from Mrs. Trout. She reappeared in the room, followed by Mrs. Smith. Personally, I should like nothing more than to have you represent our Illinois suffrage organization, but I shall have to ask you to march with the colored delegation. I'm sorry, but I feel that it's the right thing to do. Ha ha ha. I shall not march at all unless I march under the Illinois banner. And that's what I replied. When I was asked to come down here, I was asked to march with the other women of our state, and I intend to do so or not take part in the parade at all. Well, Mrs. Smith had a word to say about that. If I were a colored woman, I should be willing to march with the other women of my race. There is a difference, Mrs. Smith, which you probably do not see. I shall not march with the colored women. Either I go with you or I go not at all. I'm not taking this stand because I personally wish for recognition. I'm doing it for the future benefit of my whole race. For I felt that although she may have made gains, that's Mrs. Smith, for the suffrage, she had also confirmed white women in their attitude of segregation. When I saw that we were likely to have a restricted suffrage and the white women of the organization were working like beavers to bring it about, I made another effort to get our women interested. The voice of the people is the voice of God, and I, along with all the intensity of my soul for the Garrisons, the Douglases, the Whitners, the Phillips, who shall rouse this nation to a demand that from Greenland's icy mountains to the coral reefs of the southern seas, mob rule shall be put down and equal and exact justice be accorded to every citizen of whatever race who finds a home within the borders of the land of the free and the home of the brave. Then no longer will our national hymn be sounding brash and tinkling a cymbal, but every member of this great composite nation will be a living, harmonious illustration of the words all can honestly and gladly sing. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where our fathers died, land of pilgrims' pride. From every mountainside, freedom doth ring.